Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Board of Education. Although our agenda indicates we had closed session, there was no closed session, so the meeting is beginning at this point. Please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Our evening starts with some recognition. Dr. Krizik, would you like to give us an introduction?
This is not the first time this school year that we are here to recognize the achievements and accomplishments of our staff, and we're very proud this evening that we have two of our staff members representing certainly different portions of what our school district is all about. We will be recognizing this evening Terry Clark and Amy Thompson. At this time, I would like to begin the recognition by asking Athletic Director John Rutter to share some words about the accomplishments of Terry Clark and his recent induction into the Illinois Wrestling Coaches and Officials Hall of Fame, or his upcoming induction into the Illinois Wrestling Coaches and Officials Association Hall of Fame.
Thank you, and indeed it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Coach Clark to each and every one of you. Thank you. A 1976 graduate of Taylorville High School, Terry Clark continued his wrestling career as an Elmhurst College Blue Jay before beginning his teaching and coaching career at York High School in 1980. As the founder of the Elmhurst Junior Dukes Wrestling Club, and through his involvement with the Illinois Wrestling Federation and Illinois Kids Wrestling Federation throughout his career, Coach Clark has played a key role in hosting a combined 19 age group and high school wrestling tournaments. As an assistant wrestling coach in 1980 through 89, he helped coach 4 all-state wrestlers and 6 state qualifiers. Coach Clark was nominated for Assistant Wrestling Coach of the Year in 1988. Coach Clark became the York High School head wrestling coach in 1990. He entered this past fall, his 20th year as head coach with 371 dual meet victories. Quite an accomplishment. Terry's coaching career includes 2 individual IHSA state runners-up, 5 other all-state place winners, 23 state final qualifiers, 2 Scholastic Wrestlers of the Year. His teams have won 33 tournament championships over his career, including 3 West Suburban Conference Silver Division titles, 8 regional championships, and 2 sectional runners-up. Additionally, Coach Clark has served as the IHSA regional representative for 18 years and is one of the founding members of the West Suburban Summer Wrestling League. Terry is currently our Physical Education, Health, and Driver Education Department Chair. Duke football fans have seen Coach Clark on the sidelines as a football coach for the past 30 years. Terry is an outstanding teacher, coach, and outstanding human being, the kind of Hall of Fames love to house. He, like his program, is first class. Please join me in congratulating Coach Terry Clark on his induction into the Illinois Coaches Hall of Fame.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the Board of Education and to our administration at York, especially John and Mark Bible, Rob Wagner, Diana, for all your support. But a couple quick thank yous, and then I know we have a big agenda tonight here. But I couldn't have done this without the support of my wife, who's in the back, and for many years a single parent. For 6 months a year, and she should be in the Hall of Fame for raising our son. And also a special thanks to all the coaches I've worked with over the years. And, just, too many to name. I need to take an ad out in the paper. But, and even, more special thanks to the youth of Elmhurst, because one of the greatest gifts that I get as a coach is to watch young boys walk into York High School and watch young men leave. And that's been the most fulfilling, chapter in my career as a coach and as an educator. And, I still go to work every day very excited to work for York High School, District 205, and to represent, York athletics. Thank you for the acknowledgement, and it's been a fun run.
As a school board, we understand that the success of our students is highly driven by the type of leadership and instruction they're given. And we are proud to have within our district someone that has led our students so well. We've seen great athletic success, and also your commitment to the district and the length of time that you've continued to provide that leadership. So we'd like to thank you. And with that, I have a proclamation. Because being named the Illinois Wrestling Coaches and Officials Association Hall of Fame is a prestigious honor, and because this award is bestowed upon a select number of individuals who have demonstrated their commitment to the sport of wrestling over 20 years of service and over 300 wins, and because the candidates are selected by a committee of 24 other Hall of Fame members, and because this accomplishment brings pride and prestige to Elmhurst Community School District 205 and to the community of Elmhurst. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community School District 205 express congratulations to your community high school wrestling coach, Terry Clark, for this outstanding achievement. Congratulations.
Our next recognition tonight is for a staff member who has been awarded the Illinois School Counselor Association School Counselor Advocate of the Year. This is an individual that has worked incredibly hard at the state level on behalf of all students. And here this evening to extol all of the accomplishments of the recipient of such high honor, Amy Thompson, is Assistant Principal Rob Wagner to introduce Amy Thompson.
Good evening. I'm Rob Wagner, Assistant Principal at York High School, and it's my honor to be up here today with Amy Thompson. I'd like to congratulate Amy for being recognized as the Illinois State Counseling Association Advocate of the Year. This is one of the highest honors given by the State School Counseling Association. Amy is completing her 11th year at York High School as a counselor. 7 of those years were spent in the College and Career Center. She has served as the president of the ISCA in 2005 and has been a member of the ISCA for 12 years. Amy has always been an advocate for students, and now she is receiving an award for advocating for the counseling profession. Criteria for winning this award was based on the following. An advocate nominee must have demonstrated extreme support and advocacy for school counseling in the state over time and in ways that made a significant contribution to the school counseling profession. The nominee can be an ISCA member or someone who is not a member but who has been a strong advocate for the school counselors in their professional role in the state of Illinois. Amy is being recognized for her personal qualities, ethical standards, and characteristics of advocate for students and her peers. She has positively impacted the school counseling profession in Illinois through her advocacy. The role of a guidance counselor is dynamic. Counselors have to be caring, smart, quick on their feet, and able to handle any emergency that comes their way. Students first meet with their counselor when they enter high school. They develop a relationship, and then the counselor makes sure that they're prepared to take on the world. It is a unique profession. All of the educational careers thrown into one. At different times, you're responsible for being an advisor, a dean, a teacher, sometimes an administrator, and most importantly, a friend. Amy has this gift of being a guidance counselor, If there ever is a question that needs to be answered in the Student Service Department at York High School, guess who has the answer? Amy. She truly cares for students and for all their families. Amy is also a serious advocate for the counseling profession. Congratulations, Amy, on receiving this prestigious award. Your hard work and service is greatly appreciated.
Thank you. I actually did prepare a nice statement that I'm going to save for public participation because I'm going to do a little advocating. But I do want to say thank you very much. This has been humbling and a little overwhelming to get this kind of attention. Us counselors are pretty good at working behind the scenes, and it's a little more comfortable because we're trying to help our students. And that's really what I'm proud to have the award because that's what it's about. But I'm very appreciative to my department, to Rob, to my department chair, Julie Feldkamp, and to the entire York administration as well as district for, supporting the work we do. It's really important. I really believe that. I wouldn't do it if I didn't believe it. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Both of the individuals we recognize this evening provide services to our high school students, and particularly for parents whose children will be graduating and looking for the future. Those guidance services are particularly critical. But you're recognized not only for what you provide to our students and to our district. This recognition also reflects your commitment to the counseling profession overall and your advancement in it through not only supporting but helping to write legislation. So, for that, our entire district congratulates you, and we are thrilled for this honor, and we would like to read a proclamation. Because being named School Counselor Advocate of the Year is one of the highest honors given by the Illinois School Counselor Association, and because as a counselor for the past 11 years at York Community High School, Amy Thompson has demonstrated extreme support and advocacy for school counseling, and because she has made lifelong contributions to the ISCA as an officer and a leader, as well as an advocate at strengthening the role of school counselor at the local, regional, and state level. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express congratulations and deep appreciation to Amy Thompson for outstanding honor. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I will just take a short break, although we'd appreciate it if you want to stay through the evening. Mr. Clark and Ms. Thompson, I guess you will be staying. If you would like to exit, we will not take offense. While we're doing that, we have two main topics on our agenda tonight. There's only one item we're taking action on, and that is the Board of Education will be confirming our approval of the board norms. And what the board norms are our agreements with each other of how we are going to interact with each other and with the superintendent to be a highly effective school board. And this is something that is pretty standard practice for school boards. This school board has not done it in probably 4 or 5 years. So for those that may have followed in past practice, it's been a while since we've updated them. And with new board members, we thought it was important for us to come together and agree on how we were going to interact. The more significant topic on the agenda is our workshop topic, and I assume that's what the majority of you are here for. It's to start the work of figuring out what our deficit reduction plan is to get the resources of the district in line with the needs that we have for those resources. Dr. Krizik's going to give an introduction, and then we'll move ahead on our agenda.
Tonight's board meeting is a continuation of the conversation that began this past summer when the tentative 2009-2010 budget was first presented for consideration. Throughout the course of the budget discussions, as well as during the levy presentation, we have talked about our current fiscal condition and our projected 5-year fiscal outlook. We sought to bring everyone's attention to our impending budget deficit. Your attendance here this evening serves to reaffirm and reflect our community's investment in the fiscal health and quality of education of our district. As a first proactive step in the budget reduction process, we made $749,000 in reductions in this year's budget to ensure that we had a balanced budget, a budget that met the financial objectives, including but not limited to maintaining our fund balance ratios and not using short-term borrowing to meet our fiscal responsibilities. As a district, we have presented a balanced budget for the past 5 years, and our financial rating attained the highest designation given by the state of Illinois for the past 3. And yet, in spite of operating a relatively conservative budget, avoiding short-term borrowing for the past 3 years, and achieving financial recognition, we, like school districts around the state, are seeing the impact of last year's unprecedented Consumer Price Index, or CPI, the impact of tax caps, and the impact of budget shortfalls at the state level. Just in yesterday's paper, we read that the state has a record $5 billion in unpaid bills. Our portion of that unpaid amount currently is $2.1 million. To understand where we are today, we have to take a slight look back at the assumptions made when the referendum was passed in 2005. In looking back, we know that the assumptions made about the CPI and new property growth have been adversely affected by this economic climate. And as a result, our current economic reality is not what was anticipated in 2005. This means that the expected revenue from property taxes and new property growth, as identified in the referendum assumptions, will not be realized. What does this really mean? This means that the predictions made 5 years ago were based on the information available at the time, that it would have been difficult for anyone, to predict today's current economic climate. But the bottom line is that our revenues are significantly less than what was predicted. Every aspect of this district's operation is affected by our fiscal condition, and all of the district's operation affect our core mission, teaching and learning. Whether it's the purchase of curriculum materials and supplies, the purchase of technology, or staff development, everything we do is connected to teaching and learning. Every person who works in this district, teachers, assistants, health professionals, administrators, custodians, food service workers, everyone is connected to teaching and learning. Everyone is connected to our students. So later this evening, when Ms. Masterton provides you with another overview of our fiscal outlook and begins to outline some of the options to reduce the deficit, we know that these options will directly and indirectly impact teaching and learning, and that these options will affect the work everyone does in the district. This is the hard part of the work that we do. I want to commend our administrators and principals for the countless hours they have spent thus far in generating some options, as well as for taking on the challenge of reallocating resources to address strategic initiatives. In many ways, we are so much more fortunate that many of our surrounding, even benchmark school districts that are making budget reductions ranging from $7 million to $15 million. Earlier today, at the State of the City address, I heard Mayor DeCiani discuss how the city has had to make some difficult financial decisions in order to maintain the viability of this city. And although our projected $2.9 million in reductions are much less than other school districts, we know that any reductions, regardless of the amount, will still be painful for all of us. And as difficult as making reductions will be, they will still be necessary in order for us to remain financially stable over the next several years. Our current board policy requires that the board adopt a multi-year financial plan when fund balances fall below 30% in order to address liquidity risks and to restore fund balances to a desired level over a reasonable period of time. After this evening's presentation, it will be critical for all of us to focus our time and our energies in identifying solutions to the issues before us to enable this board and this district to balance its resources with its responsibilities. And while it is important to understand the factors that have contributed to our future fiscal condition, Time spent looking backwards will not help us move forward. We will need to use the time we have in the next few weeks and months to work to identify and implement solutions if we are going to continue the work to make this district one of the best in the country. Tonight's presentation is yet another of the steps in the process to help us focus on finding solutions to having a balanced budget, to meeting our fiscal objectives and beliefs, and most importantly, to maximizing our available resources in ways we have never done previously. Tonight is not about making decisions. It is not about making recommendations. Tonight is an important step in the process of understanding how critical it will be for all of us to work together to find solutions to our projected budget deficits while minimizing the impact as much as possible of our vision on becoming a national leader in educating children of all backgrounds and ability levels and promoting high individual student achievement. Tonight, we will provide the context for the deficit reduction options and revenue enhancements, because without the context, it would be difficult to understand why these reduction options and revenue enhancements are being presented. After this evening's presentation, all of this information will be posted to our website in a process to obtain feedback, suggestions, recommendations, even solicit questions from all stakeholders will be put in place this evening. So later I will be introducing Ms. Masterton, who will review the PowerPoint presentation that most of you should have copies of this evening. Mrs. Ostojic.
Thank you, Dr. Krizik. We're going to follow the meeting agenda down for public comments, and tonight is a workshop topic, so I do have the public comment sheet, and I'll go through these names, and these individuals can come up and speak. You'll need to come up to the podium and turn on the microphone and start with your name and address. Because this is a workshop topic, there also is the opportunity to interact and come up and ask questions after the board discussion has occurred on this particular topic. It's not typically the board practice to publicly address comments, but however, on workshop topics, there is some interaction that occurs there. Because we have a lot of people here and we have some significant things to address, and it is our board policy, you need to limit your comments to 3 minutes. There is a timer up there that'll give you an indicator when your time is up, and at that time, please don't take offense, but we're going to cut you off and move on to the next speaker. So with that, our first speaker is Amy Thompson.
Okay, here's my advocacy part. Because I was so Amy Thompson, sorry, address, 773 Western Avenue, Glen Ellen, employee of District 205. Because I was so kindly recognized for my ISCA Advocacy Award tonight, I felt I would be a pretty poor advocate if I didn't say just a few words about 2 items that are on the list of potential cuts for the District 205 budget. I realize you are still in the early planning stages of the process, so I know there are a number of additional discussions that are likely to take place before final cuts are determined, and I'm certain that ideally we would all prefer that no cuts occurred. That said, I believe that elimination of the middle school guidance program and reducing the number of counselors at the middle schools would be extremely detrimental, not just to the counselors, obviously, but to the students they teach and counsel, the teachers they support, the families they help, and the administrators they assist. School counselors help students to succeed academically, and after all, that is our school district's primary responsibility. If students are struggling, counselors dig in and try to find ways to help them succeed. For example, we are at the forefront of implementing response to intervention at the middle school and the high school level. School counselors help students manage social emotional concerns. If students are acting out in class, counselors try to find out what issues may be contributing to their poor choices. In other words, we work with students so that teachers have a classroom environment that is conducive for learning. School counselors help students plan for their future. If students are losing motivation, counselors help them think about the future, research careers, understand personal strengths and weaknesses, and learn what it takes to get into college. This can provide all students with a sense of excitement and hope. The guidance curriculum in our schools provides needed support for all students, while group and individual counseling provides remediation and support for those students facing a particular issue or set of issues. If a parent is ill or dies, if a teacher dies, if a friend turns into a bully, or if there are family issues, for example, for a small sampling, our students are distracted and less able to learn. Counselors step in to help them learn a variety of coping skills, interpersonal skills, time management, and conflict resolution skills so that our kids can focus on success in school. We have an exemplary middle school counseling program, and it would be a shame to take a gold standard program and make it anything less. We talk about striving to be better, and we compare ourselves to other districts. We look for best practices. And in our middle schools, our counseling program is the best practice for the state. There are many fantastic programs in District 205. We don't want to lose a single one. Please consider keeping our middle school guidance curriculum and our middle school counselors. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Paul Garino. Is Mr. Garino present? We'll move on to the next speaker, Suzanne Waite.
My name is Suzanne Waite. I live at 588 North Kenilworth. To Dr. Krizik, Madam President, and the Board of Education. I have 3 students currently enrolled in District 205. I've recently heard that you are considering as a cost-cutting measure eliminating the health aide positions in District 205. Whether or not you are considering eliminating the health aide positions or hiring an outside agency, I think you should reconsider. From my experience as a parent over the past 10 years in District 205, the health aide is an integral part of the school staff. We practically consider them family. Not only do they dispense ice packs and Band-Aids and take temperatures, when they call the parents, there's that certain tone they have when delivering the news that David isn't feeling so well, which indicates that he is probably just having a bad day and is fine to stay at school. Or, you really need to come and get this kid now. Having a great health aide like we have at Field School and Kathleen Gilden is a source of comfort for parents. We know our kids are not only in competent hands, they are in caring hands. I know also that the health aides perform many duties that are not in their job description. Although my kids for the most part are healthy, we have certainly used our share and beyond of the health aides' time with headaches, stomach aches, school anxiety, and scraped knees. At the middle school level and at York, my kids have had medication dispensed as well for chronic illnesses, such as asthma and ADD. I understand the need to cut costs, but to eliminate these positions seems to be short-sighted, as we are facing illnesses such as H1N1. Eliminating experienced staff that care about our children and their well-being, who communicate effectively with parents, and who assist the principals and the office staff in the schools, freeing them up to do their jobs, does not seem like it would save money in the long run. I hope in your workshop you will consider and think outside the box and find a way to save money without eliminating or outsourcing these important positions. I also would like to read a letter from my son, David. Dear members of the Board of Education, my name is David Waite. I live at 588 North Kenilworth. I go to Field Elementary School. I am a 5th grader. I think that you should keep the health aides in District 205. The health aides are caring, and because if someone gets sick or hurt, they won't get the proper treatment without the health aide. For example, when I am sick or get hurt at my school, Miss Gilden always is there. She treats me kindly and with respect. Also, without her, I would probably be getting an F in music because I have forgotten my instrument, and she is always there to let me use the phone. Please do not fire the health aides, because that would just mean more people searching for jobs. I hope you consider keeping them. Sincerely, David Waite. Thank you.
Thank you. That's our last speaker just signed up for public comment. We're going to move ahead onto our workshop topic. Again, I'll turn it over to Dr. Krizik, but just to reconfirm, this is really our first conversation that we're having, first discussion that we're having about what potential items are out there for cuts. We expect this to be a process that goes on over several months, and we appreciate the fact that so many people have come out tonight, and it's important for us to hear from as many stakeholders as possible. This board is going to go through some of the same hard work that many school boards are going throughout the country, not just the state of Illinois. And there are going to be difficult decisions to make. So the more information, more input we get from the community can only help make our decisions the best ones. With that, Dr. Krizik.
What you're going to hear from Ms. Masterton tonight is somewhat of a review of information that has been presented at previous board meetings, but we felt it was important to put all of the information together in a single context. And so at this point in time, Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Ms. Masterton, will provide the financial outlook overview that will begin to address the cost reduction and resource allocation process, options, and strategies. Ms. Masterton.
Thank you, Dr. Krizik, and good evening, Board of Education. We'll review, as a part of our overview, we will be reviewing the issues and financial changes that account for the current economic conditions. Based on these conditions, we will review our outlook for fund balances in the operating funds, and then discuss the process by which we identified possible areas of cost reduction and efficiency, including revenue enhancement options and reduction options. And we will discuss what we believe to be is the next steps in the process. Our current economic conditions that affect our budget include property taxes being capped at the Consumer Price Index of 0.1% for 2008, a limited new property growth for the immediate and near future is predicted, and state budget deficits have caused some payments to be delayed, reduced, or eliminated. Currently, the state has issued vouchers of $2.1 million to us that have not yet been remitted, and we don't know when they will. And earlier this year, the State Board of Education cut grant allocations equating to $261,000 less in fiscal 10. This chart shows the fluctuations in the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, with a high of 4.1% in 2008. That was our heyday. We were happy that year. And now to a low of 0.1% in 2009. In the last 6 years, only 3 years have had a CPI higher than 3%. And the average Consumer Price Index over the 6 years since the referendum has been 2.5%. Another significant factor is the tax in tax revenue is the new property or new construction growth in the district. This is a chart showing that new property growth. You'll notice that in 2004, we had a spike in property growth due to the TIF 1 release of residential property. And then again in 2007, we had a slight release as well as a real estate boom that was going on. Then shortly after that, we began to see the effects of the economy and a drop down to $40 million in 2008, and our projection for 2009 is about $25 million. The next chart depicts the regular tax rate changes since the passing of the referendum. In 2005, the referendum Ed Fund rate increase was implemented. Because the district promised that there would not be a phase-in of the rate, the actual beginning rate was a 24-cent increase instead of the 30-cent. Since that time, due to tax cap, the rate has eroded away, leaving the current rate 34 cents less than the original referendum rate. Again, we'll talk about those state budget issues. As Dr. Krizik had mentioned, the state has a $13 billion deficit. Grant payments have been delayed at least 120 days. We've had elimination of some programs that directly affect us, including the textbook loan program. and some some mandated categoricals were reduced, and including early childhood, bilingual, reading improvement, the school safety block grant. The state is currently paying for general state aid out of ARRA funds from the federal government. They are unsure how they will fund those school payments next year when this funding source is gone. In November, at the time the board passed our tax levy, we made some budget projections based on the following revenue and expenditure assumptions. As we've discussed in previous meetings, these new assumptions are very different than the assumptions used in 2005 when the referendum was passed. The CPI, the Consumer Price Index, at that time was projected at 3% every year, and new growth was expected to be level or at an increase every year. Instead, EAB growth is projected to decline by 10% this year and not increase the year after. New construction will decline to around $25 million for this year, and no new property is projected for 2011, according to the York assessor. And the CPI affecting 2010 revenue, as we talked about, is 0.1%. The December CPI has been projected at 1.5%. General state aid was increased about $50 this year, but sources from the state have told us not to expect an increase next year. Our expenditure assumptions included teacher full-time equivalency, or FTE, of 611 staff in 2010 and 618 in 2011. These numbers are based on staffing needs generated by enrollment changes estimated in the CONSARDA enrollment projections. Overall salary increases were projected at 1% to 2% for those employees not covered by an existing collective bargaining agreement for these years. We have assumed health, dental, and life insurance premium increases of 10% per year, and the assumptions take into consideration costs incurred at continuing class sizes of no more than 24 in the elementary grades. Yeah, next one. From these assumptions, we've generated a chart of our projected financial forecast. The projections show that although this year our revenues will continue to exceed expenditures by over $1.6 million, next year we expect to spend approximately $708,139 more than we receive. In ensuing years, we will increasingly receive less than we expend, causing fund balances to fall in 2012 well below the 25% to 30% of expenditures needed in order to keep a positive cash balance at all times during the fiscal year. And here's a graphic representation of those projected fund balances. And the next slide is a chart that depicts the erosion of the cash balances caused by spending more than we receive. Normally, our lowest cash point falls just before we receive our first tax distribution of the year. We receive taxes in June and September, so our normal lowest cash point falls in the end of May. By May 2012, the negative cash point will result in the issuance of tax anticipation warrants, or TAWs. TAWs are a short-term borrowing mechanism that allows us to pay bills and meet our payroll obligations until we receive our next distribution of property taxes. To summarize, based on the current 5-year financial projections, we will, 1, expend more than we receive beginning next year in fiscal 11. Our fund balances will decline and fall below acceptable limits in 2012. Our district will need to borrow money through tax anticipation warrants or short-term borrowing to meet expenses in fiscal 12. And our district fiscal rating will decline, which could have adverse effects on any future bond issues. So now that we have determined our budget deficit concerns, our next step is to look at what we needed to do to address those concerns. There are 7 steps that we took in the process and we'll be describing to you. 1, we would revisit our Phase 1 reductions. 2, we reviewed our financial beliefs and objectives. 3, we reviewed our 5-year financial projections. We reassessed our compliance with state mandates for number 4. And 5, we took into account consideration of strategic initiatives such as hiring and retaining of high-quality personnel, our dedication to develop and adhere to a 5-year curriculum review cycle, and align our tech deployment curriculum requirements as well. 6, we sought administrator input on potential cost reductions. And 7, we identified possible revenue enhancement options. To begin the process, the Board of Education, in keeping with its fiscal policies, directed administration to make reductions in 2009-2010. These Phase 1 reductions included reductions in furniture purchases, equipment, postage and supplies, as well as salary reductions in secretarial overtime, extra duty curriculum review, and staff development. We further pledged to make staff reductions through the review of existing open positions. With these reductions in the amount of $749,006, we met a fund balance ratio of 28.6%. We then reviewed our financial beliefs and objectives, that student and school needs should be equitably met while maintaining district fiscal restraints in the spirit of fiduciary responsibility, that we have a balanced budget where revenues equal to or exceed expenditures, that we maintain our 25 to 30% operating fund balance and that is an expenditure ratio, fund balance to expenditures, that we eliminate the need for the tax anticipation warrants so that we have no short-term borrowing to meet cash flow requirements. In reassessing our compliance with state mandates and through our review of strategic initiatives, we also identified new anticipated education fund expenditures for 2011 and 2012. As part of our strategic initiative and to adhere to the 5-year curriculum cycle, we included our middle school science adoption at the amount of $185,000 for fiscal 11, as well as increased by 1/2 FTE a world language elementary teacher due to enrollment increases. In order to comply with state mandates, a growing ELL population necessitates a different model of instruction with increases in certified staff of 8 FTE. And in order to meet our RTI and assessment needs, our current psychology staff of 6.2 FTE would increase by 1 in 2011 and 1 in 2012. Our total new anticipated education fund expenditures for 2011 was $780,000. And in fiscal 12, we would follow our middle school science adoption with the science adoption for the elementary schools, as well as the planned social studies adoption for that grade level in the amount of $315,000 and $350,000 respectively. We carry forward the 1/2 world language teacher and the 8 FTE for an additional $515,000, and the aforementioned 2 full-time psychologists for an additional $160,000, having additional expenditures in fiscal 12 of $1,340,000. So to show you the adjusted budget deficit for those 2 years, in fiscal 11 we had a projected deficit of $708,139 with the additional expenditures in fiscal 11, the $780,000, the adjusted expenditures exceeding revenues is $1,488,139. And in fiscal 12, our projected deficit was $2,669,906, additional expenditures of $1,340,000, leaving expenditures exceeding revenues of $4,009,906. We then revisited our forecast with the inclusion of the new anticipated expenditures for 2011 and 2012. And as you can see, in 2011, we begin a pattern of spending more than we were receiving, reducing fund balances each year until, without further reduction, in 2015, our fund balance would decrease to less than $11.6 million. The largest deficit would occur in the Ed Fund, although all operating funds, with the exception of working cash, show deficit spending in 2014. With this information, we began to review possible revenue enhancement options. The high school a few years ago has had for a few years a $35 technology fee as part of the student fees. With the expansion of technology in the elementary and middle schools that has taken place over the last 2 to 3 years, we believe it fair to mirror that fee in the elementary and middle schools. That amount that would be generated and create a parity at all levels is $194,600 per year. As a one-year incentive to orient parents to an early registration period, we included a 10% discount if parents registered before June 1st for the following school year, and that was last year that we included that incentive. The removal of the one-year incentive will generate an additional $101,470 in additional revenue. And Mr. Smith has been able to implement a program that allows for the purchase of used equipment that we can no longer use efficiently. The remarket of this retired technology equipment would generate approximately $5,000 per year. We will make a presentation to the board next month with a proposal for an increase in facility fees. The increase in facility fees would generate approximately $168,200. Our facility fees have not increased in several years, and we know that our fees are not in alignment with other districts and not at all cost neutral. With all of these revenue enhancement options, the total amount equals $469,270. We then began to consider reductions. And within our considerations, we thought about the need to avoid deficit spending, to maintain that fund balance ratio and minimize or eliminate short-term borrowing, to redistribute and optimize existing fiscal resources in order to improve instruction, to minimize the impact of reductions on core instruction. We assumed no change in the school funding formula as we went through this, and we assumed no changes to or reduced funding from the state in the form of general state aid and grants. To that end, and with the input and suggestion of administrators, cabinet, principals, we have generated a possible reduction options of $2.9 million, along with the Phase 1 operational efficiencies of almost $750,000. The $2.9 million of reduction options are broken out as follows. Administrative instructional support programs and staff reductions of $1,828,532. Further equipment, supplies, and technology deployment reductions of $511,865. Additional operational efficiencies of $224,447. In the operations and maintenance fund, we have identified approximately $87,000 worth of options available for reduction, and in the transportation fund, $250,855. At the end of this meeting, we will make available to the attendees on the table outside of the board meeting room a spreadsheet of line-by-line reduction options that comprise these totals. This spreadsheet, along with this presentation, will also be posted on the front page of our website tomorrow morning. However, our goal this evening was not to discuss the line-by-line options, but to better understand the background behind these options. So, taking into account these revenue enhancement and reduction option strategies and positioning them against the projected deficit results in an excess of revenue over expenditures of $1,883,830 in fiscal 11, and an additional positive addition to the fund balance in fiscal 12 of $1,425,893. In order to just have a balanced budget in which expenditures do not exceed revenue, we've provided you with some break-even numbers. That shows the reductions as only being $1,018,869 in fiscal 11 and $2,832,487 in fiscal 12, $497 in fiscal 12. But you need to note, while a break-even scenario appears attractive, because it doesn't actually end up with a reduction of fund balances, the ratio of fund balance to expenditures will decrease, still causing possible cash flow options. So really, in effect, it only solves one of our financial objectives, which is to have a balanced budget. What are our next steps? With the information we have provided, our next steps are as follows. We would ask the board to review these expenditure reduction options. Based on new information, including the December CPI numbers, which will be announced Friday morning, 8:30 a.m., I'll be on the internet looking for them. We will be updating the November projections to more accurately represent the financial outlook of the district. By January 26, 2010, we would ask the board to establish an expenditure reduction target amount for 2010-11 and beyond. We will then provide opportunities for stakeholder input, suggestions, and recommendations on reduction options and revenue enhancements. The administration will then refine those expenditure reductions options and recommendations based on targeted amount that the board has provided and the additional input, suggestions, and recommendations received. By March 9, 2009, we would ask the board to approve the final expenditure reductions for 2010-2011. This includes the portion of the presentation. Mrs. Ostachek, I would be happy to answer any questions from the board.
I'm going to open up for questions, comments from the board. Before I do that, can I just get one confirmation? You know, in this forecast through fiscal year 15, I know you've laid out in here what your assumptions are as far as CPI and new growth for fiscal year 10 and 11. I think fiscal year 11 is 1.5% CPI growth. Can you tell me what your assumptions were as we go in the out years for the CPI and also for new growth?
Yes. In fiscal 12, 13, 14, and 15, we continued to use the 1.5. And then we slowly began to increase new growth by 10 million, and then I believe it's 25 million the year after that, and then leveled out at 30 million for the following 3 years on that.
I'll open this up to the board. Any questions or comments?
It's a lot to take in, huh?
It is a lot to take in, and I guess I'm going to just start. I mean, we've got this list that is a starting point for discussion for options, and my understanding from conversations with Dr. Krizik and the background information we've been given is that these are recommendations that were made from the administration, from the principals, based upon the priorities that they would have, and based upon the strategic plan. When we have to make the decisions as far as how deep we need to go, and again, you laid out two options there. One is basically keep the budget balanced. That may or may not work out as far as a cash flow. We could still be in a situation, even with the balanced budget, where we're doing short-term borrowing. So that as a board is something that we're going to have to make a decision on. And then once we figure out the amounts, then it might be a little bit easier to look at this listing here and come up with, what we think are the options that we would prioritize, and one some higher than the other. So I guess I will open it up for the board to give any input on that process. We can start the conversation with the perspective on, as we look in the out years, those numbers are a little less firm because we really don't know what's going to happen with the CPI. We know in the short term that it was in fact 0.1%, which is going to be half of our year revenue for this current fiscal year, and we know it will also be the first half for next year. As you indicated, next week we'll know what we'll finish next year with and then go into the following year. So that starts to give us a little bit more shape around the out years. So I guess I'd first ask the board to give any reaction in regard to, which way do we want to go? Do we want to try to ensure that we don't have any negative cash flow, that we continue to build. And that would be based upon the 30% fund balance, which would be the scenario one. Or do we want to pull back a little bit and focus short-term on the balanced budget, knowing that in fiscal year 12, I think is the first year we looked at short-term borrowing, that we could be in a situation where we're borrowing money to fund our bills. Ms. Masterton.
You know, the one thing that we probably haven't talked about is at any time that we begin a deficit budget, we do have to provide the state with reduction options for the following 5 years. So that's just something to take into consideration when we do with that, is that we would be continuing to do that. And I suspect that there are going to be a lot of districts that are going to be doing that in the next few years. But it is something that you just should be aware of. It's part of the budget document in that.
Mrs. Davy.
I'm happy to just jump in on this because these are numbers that don't make any of us happy, and I think that there are boards all across the state that have already made some of these tough decisions of cuts, and part of me realizes that the 7 of us and our administrators have the future of our district on our backs right now, because we have to make some decisions now to ensure that future boards are in good financial shape, because boards ahead of us, in prior years, have done the same thing. That's why we have healthy fund balances. That's why when we got our extra money from the referendum in 2005, we put it in the bank. There would have been temptation by many boards to go ahead and start increasing and doing things with that money. We systematically put money in the bank because we said we would. We made a promise in the referendum, and so we did that. So that has helped us to this point because we have healthy balances. We have a savings account. So 2 things run through my mind. We have to make decisions before we have all the information. We're going to have to decide, if we follow the timeline in March, we will know the December CPI, and that will give us some better information. But we don't know in the next 4 years what the CPI is going to be. We're looking at 0.1%. We're looking at what the CPI is projected to be, which is still under 2. We don't know what it will be. But at some point, is inflation going to start kicking in, and is that going to have an impact on the CPI? And that will have a positive impact in it could have a positive impact on our budget in the out years. You have shown us, rightly so, very conservative numbers. But I hate to make decisions based on guesstimates that possibly won't come out as bad as we're looking at. Again, I'm going back to my statement, though. We have to make decisions, based on future boards, the health of our district. So I'm really not saying anything in one direction or the other, because I think that we have to keep all this in context of what we value in our district, and we value the financial health of our district as much as we value these programs that are put on the table here for discussion. So it's not an easy decision to even put dollar amount on what the financial future health of this district is. I do have a question about your assumptions. We've been working very well with the city on some of our TIF releases, and we got some good news that there will be a release of some significant dollars this spring that will help this year's budget. Hopefully we'll have it before the close of the year. What assumptions have you made in these projections for any potential future TIF dollars?
Well, through our discussions with the city, we were already told that we should not expect anything from our TIF 3 for the following year. So there's nothing in there for that. And because we had no way of really ascertaining whether there was going to be any TIF 2 monies or not, the city was very gracious in saying, this year we won't be having any projects in TIF 2, but we can't promise that that's not going to happen next year. So we've not included any additional nebulous income that might come forward from any of the TIFs, mostly because we just really sincerely don't know what it might come from. As you know, last year we included $350,000 in the budget, assuming for TIF 2, and we needed to take that out because then we heard we weren't going to get it, and now we are going to be getting that plus a little bit more, quite a bit more actually. And so, you know, it's one of those things where the city doesn't know and we don't know, and so we have not included that in our projections.
I was going to go to Mrs. Deroni if she's ready, otherwise.
Just wanted to clarify that everything on the sheet, the chopping block sheet, those items add up to what we would need to cut from next year's budget in order to balance our budget and preserve our fund balances. At what percent? At 25 or at 30?
Somewhere in between the two of them, in between not at a full 30, probably more about 27%.
So if we were to, in fact, hypothetically, take everything on that sheet and say, yes, let's do all of this, the following year, we need another $1 million plus in order to do the same thing. Am I reading this correctly?
No, the way we base the projections is if you begin making those reductions in 2011, they carry forward into 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015. And assuming that you don't restore any of those reductions, we would be in a healthy financial projection all the way through 2015 on that.
So we don't need an additional $3 million to do those two things for fiscal 12?
That's correct. It's all built into it.
Only if we were to restore all of those things would we need to come up with the whole new $3 million. Okay.
There's a cascading effect in some of the projections that we've made, particularly in the sense that when we're talking about programs or staff reductions in there, that's an ongoing expense that continues to grow and to grow and to grow. When you reduce that, unlike supplies, which you can maybe reduce for one time, and then sooner or later you're going to have to do something about that, and it has to be reduplicated, or, you know, if you're putting it off and you start it up again later on, that's got to be added back into it. You know, if you're reducing a program, then you don't necessarily need that staff, and the enrollment increases are included in terms of you know, regular classroom instruction are included in the projections. So even if enrollment increased, that's included in there.
Suppose enrollment decreases by a chunk.
Well, then that would need further reductions.
Is there any way to gauge what that percentage, what that does for us if our enrollment, for example, I mean, we're guessing on CPI, we're guessing on enrollment, we're guessing on all these things. Is there any way to know if our enrollment drops 10%, we would need X percent less reduction, or how do we deal with all of these assumptions?
Our CASARTA projections are not showing that our enrollment is going to be decreasing in the next 3 to 5 years. So while we may see pockets of decrease in different schools or sites, it balances the overall student enrollment in the district is not only remaining stable, but it's continuing to increase. We also don't know what the current economy is going to continue to have on our enrollment for next school year. And that should there not be continued recovery, if we will see a greater influx of private and parochial school students coming into the district that would not had been anticipated as part of the CASARTA projections. I believe York saw a higher than average increase of students enrolled coming in this year at the high school level, and I think their incoming freshman class has a high number of students coming from the private and parochial sector too. So we have no data to show that we are in a declining enrollment scenario. Just point out something. Mrs. Deroni, the $2.9 million that you asked that question about, there would be an additional $180,000 in FY 12 that would be affected by the options that are generated. Because as one of the options is looking at class size, there would be 4 classrooms, that 4 positions reduced this year and an additional 3 next year. So that 2.9 is increased by 180,000, which brings us a little over $3 million. So I just wanted to re-clarify that question that you had asked. It is a reduplicative 2.9, but in an out year, it is 180. And depending on what out years look like in 13, 14, and 15, whether that's an additional 60, whether that's an additional 120, would be dictated by enrollment.
Ms. Hirsch?
This is a very difficult conversation to start and to have. And I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and demonstrating your interest. It's obviously for many of you near and dear to your hearts. Many of you are employees in the district and you feel as though you would be directly affected. Some of you are community members. And I guess I say at this point, thank you for electing us. This is why we get paid the big bucks, is to make the really difficult decisions. But really, I think that is the board's job, is overall, our responsibility is to balance the resources that we have available to us with the needs and the wants of the community in terms of educating our children for the community. This is not an easy job to do. It's an easier job to do when you have a 4% CPI and you have money coming in. Our enrollment has been going up. We have great new curriculum that we have been updating and implementing, and technology, and we've been on a roll making very, very positive strides. And, everybody's pocketbook, the belt tightening is going on for everybody, all of you in your individual homes, all of us in our individual lives as well. I guess I want to go back to communicating what the core values, at least my core values are, and that is that we do have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we provide a financially stable educational environment for our students, for our staff, for our administration, for our community. And so while, we hate to make any recommended cuts and we want the best for all of our children, we also do have a very difficult responsibility to balance those things. My personal And so that we're all hesitating to start the conversation. It's not an easy conversation to have. My personal belief is that we try to keep any cuts that we do have to make away from the classroom. But as Dr. Krizik stated in her introduction, every person who's employed by the district has an impact and effect on the children in our schools and our classrooms. So I think, my request is additional and complete information. It's not an easy job to sit up here and to say to anybody that we have to make cuts and we have to cut back, because we do believe in all of our programs. We wouldn't be implementing them and we wouldn't have hired people and be deploying them if we didn't believe in them. But I do think that the best information that we can have in terms of the impact and having a full understanding of what each individual proposed cut how it would impact our children, how it would impact our staff. I think we need to have a conversation and make sure that we fully understand what the implications are of any proposed cuts so that we're making very well-informed decisions. I also agree that community input and feedback is very, very critical to this process. We are elected representatives of our community, and that means that we rely upon you to give us your feedback and your input on this very difficult situation. I don't have an answer. I wish I had an answer. The other concern that I do have is that our state funding, which I'm going to ballpark it, most of our funding comes from our property taxes. 87% comes from our property taxes. So 87% of our budget is coming from that property tax base that is not growing anymore. We also rely, I think we get about $8 million from the state. We know the financial situation that the state of Illinois is in. The state of Illinois is providing us with funds that they have not set aside. They are, if I'm stating this correctly, the funding that we are receiving this year from the state of Illinois is actually dollars that are federal dollars that are flowing through the state. The state of Illinois is not currently paying their education bills. They are using federal dollars to pay us. So while we look at this year's revenue from the state and we're projecting next year's revenue from the state, years outward, we have no idea how the state is going to meet. Right now, those, for us this year, it's about $8 million. That's of grave concern. And then the federal dollars are, I think, around $3 million. So the majority of our income, our revenues, comes from our property taxes, and the growth has greatly affected it. I'm going on and on and on, but I want to make sure that we are putting all of this in context. So I am very concerned as well, even looking at our revenues going out beyond next year, given the situation that the state of Illinois is in and paying their bills.
Mr. Collins.
I first would like to start with a question, and I'll keep it short. But Dr. Krizik, you started out kind of overviewing what other districts' challenges are. Can you go into a little bit more detail, a few more districts in our surrounding communities, just to, first of all, put our decision in perspective of other communities in DuPage County and the surrounding areas?
I will preface my comments, Mr. Collins, by saying that last year we saw some of our surrounding districts begin to make some rather significant cuts. The first that comes to mind is Wheaton District 200, that made more than $7 million worth of cuts last year. The question had was on everyone's mind here last year when we were putting the budget together, how significant were this year's cuts going to be for us? Because of our good fiduciary management over the past several years, we were in a much better fiscal position, and so we did not need to be as aggressive in making any significant cuts this year. As Ms. Masterton indicated, we had approximately $749,000 of mostly operational efficiencies this year. We know that last night, St. Charles District 303 was presented with $5.5 million worth of revenue expenditures. St. Charles is a unit district that we look to on some levels in terms of what they're doing. We know that Indian Prairie School District is looking to make more than $9 million worth of expenditure reductions in this upcoming year, but they also have to make reductions beyond the $9 million in subsequent years. That is just the first step of a multi-year reduction phase. We know that Wheaton 200 is looking at making an additional $8 to $11 million worth of cuts this year, and they know they have to make additional cuts in the year beyond that, non-duplicative, beyond what they are cutting. We know that Glenbard School District is making $6 million plus 10% of their operating budget worth of expenditure reductions for the upcoming year. And we know today that the Maine District is cutting their district anywhere between $15 and $18 million for the upcoming school year because of they too have been affected by a variety of the scenarios we have. Locally, some of the elementary districts, Hinsdale 181, is making budget reductions as well and is facing some of the same programmatic issues and challenges and priorities that we are facing as well. While not every district has, again, publicly, released, there isn't a superintendent that I talk to on a day-to-day basis that is not either facing impending budgetary reductions this year, but will in subsequent years. Everyone has been affected by two things, the CPI and the impact on tax caps. But there are districts other than us, Mr. Collins, that rely more heavily on general state aid than we do. And that is the concern that many of the neighboring school districts have, that if the state fails to meet their general state aid obligations, it will put some of them in some, I'll call, catastrophic situations. We're fortunate that we're on a formula basis, that while we rely on our general state aid and we value every dollar, it is not a significant portion of our budget as it is in relationship to some of our surrounding districts. And so that just kind of gives you a little bit of a context for what some of our other, again, benchmark districts. We look to Indian Prairie, we look to 200. We do look in some cases at even some of our high school districts to see what it is that they're doing and how they're making some decisions. So That's what we know today, and that list is growing every single day. You can't open up the paper without reading which school district is facing budgetary challenges at this moment in time. Again, as it was stated earlier, no one is facing easy choices. They're only facing difficult choices.
Okay. I have just one or two more questions and then just a short statement of how I would approach this from just my personal standpoint. Ms. Masterton, can you review again what the assumptions that were made when we passed two major referenda just a few years ago, and how we can be so far off today from where we thought we would be today, given the assumptions in that referendum?
If you don't mind me going over to my desk to review it,
Please do.
Can I get to sit down?
Important.
I think so.
In December of 2005, the assumptions to the 5-year projections included EAV growth in 10 and 11 of 7% and onwards from there. And at this point right now, the change is a negative 17%. And in 2011, it would be a negative 7% because we're projecting an equalized assessed valuation drop of 10% for this year and 0% even break for the year following. New property for 2010 and 11 was assumed to be in 2005 $56 million in 10 and $60 million in 11. It is projected to be $25 million in 10 and 0 in 11. The CPI was projected to be 3% for both 10 and 11. And as we've talked about, it's 0.1, and we're projecting 1.5. General state aid annual increases were projected to be $100 in both 10 and 11. And we're now projecting $50 for this year if we get all our payments, and 0 increase for subsequent years. Our teacher FTE was projected to be 570. It is translated to 611. And then 571, and it is projected to be 618 in 2011. Salary increases were projected to be 3% throughout, and we're now on those, and these are just projections of somewhere between 1% and 2% overall. One good thing, benefit increases were projected at 20%, and we've worked very hard, and in particular the insurance committee has done a great job, and we're down to 10% increases, and actually we're a little less last year. So we're projecting 10% increases on that. And class sizes, again, we're at 24, and our projections included that 24 or less class size for the elementary grades. With a 33-cent referendum increase, fund balances for 2010 were projected to be $26,909,341 in 2005, and we're now saying it's $27,602,998. So we've actually done better. The problem is our expenditures have gone up. While our revenue's gone up, so have our expenditures. So the ratio is the issue. But in 2011, with that 33-cent referendum increase, the projections were to be $30 million plus for the fund balance, and we are now suggesting that it will drop to $26,894,000.
Okay. When you say our expenditures went up, what were the biggest categories of unforeseen increases?
Staff, and staff.
So
Teachers.
Salaries went up faster than what the people that did the projected?
Absolutely.
Head count. Okay, head count. Thank you. All right. Well, first, I guess, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I guess I have one statement of hope. I have the utmost respect for the people that worked on the referendum and worked tirelessly to pass it, and it needed to be done, and this community is better off for it. And this district, first of all, is way better off than many of our peer districts because we passed that referendum. However, the best projections made by some of the best minds were clearly wrong. So my statement of hope is that our best projections will turn out to be clearly wrong and better than expected over the next few years. But with that said, part of our job is to run this like a business. I consider this the most important business in this community. But like any business, we must be fiscally responsible. We must spend less than we take in. We cannot leverage future boards' predicaments by spending more today than we take in today. I am completely against that. However, I'm also not in favor of eliminating things for our children's future that we may find a year or two from now we actually could have afforded.
Right.
So with that perspective, I mean, I think, Dr. Krizik, what you're looking for tonight is some guidance from the board, and that would be my guidance. Thank you.
Mr. Kralquist.
Mrs. Osijek, let me start by addressing your question directly, and then I want to explore two areas, if I could, Ms. Masterton, specifically around projections and process, so I don't lose my train of thought. But Mrs. Osijek, to your question about the approach or the intent, I think it's of paramount importance that as a Board of Education we protect the financial posture of this district today and going forward. As Dr. Krizik pointed out at the beginning in her remarks, for the past 3 years, this district has had a position of the highest financial rating given to school districts from the state of Illinois. And that is something that as a community we should be proud of, and as a Board of Education, something that we need to protect very, very carefully. It impacts bond ratings. It impacts many aspects of our district, the attractiveness of this as a community to invest in and so forth. So with that having been said, it is critical that as we set and build and develop budget, that it's done in balance and it's done in such a way that it protects the reserves. I bristle at the word savings, and because it really is it is a reserve, because in essence what happens is we receive tax dollars fundamentally, and then those get spent down during the course of the year, and then the next year tax dollars come in again. There is no savings. It really is a buffer to cover the expenditures during the course of the year. And I know, Mrs. Dave, you understand that, but I want to make sure that as a public we understand that. And the reason that's important is, these projections that you're presenting this evening, Ms. Masterton, are heavily predicated on a couple of just fundamental elements. First and foremost, it's the CPI. So the CPI is experienced a dynamic this past year that has not been anywhere close since in the 20 years that the property tax cap legislation has been in effect. And that has a direct correlation to the revenues. And in this case, when a CPI is flat, expenditures can do whatever they want, enrollment can go through the roof, but revenues are going to be capped at that. That's one. The second biggest variable that we've experienced has been around new construction. And we know in this economy, and we know the projections, and we can look at what's happening in our community, new construction is not going to provide an influx of revenues. Although I do want to asterisk that and come back and talk a little bit more about TIF. And then the third piece are enrollments and the costs. And I would be interested in our subsequent discussions is to drill in a little bit more around the CASARDA numbers and to look at, again, just like you've given us the financial dynamics over the last few years and how some of the assumptions have changed versus the current reality, to look at that in terms of the enrollments. Have the enrollments grown at rates faster or lower, and how do we project those, going forward? We can all surmise that things like private school enrollments may, ebb and flow and the like, but without new construction, without perhaps a lot of transiency, or at least influx, enrollments may stay flat. They may not drop, but they may stay flat, and over time, that has a positive effect on the budget. So I think that's an area that as a board, I think I'd like us to explore further. One question, Ms. Masterton, just in terms of the projections. Like Mr. Collins, I'm a big believer that we should expect, or plan for the worst and hope for the best. And I know that as a board, and you as our financial custodian have have built these models, these projections, with assumptions, I'll say, that are are pragmatic and perhaps err on the side of conservatism. Is that a fair statement? Have you worked the models, though, to provide some type of sensitivity analysis, some range around our hope? In other words, not best case pie in the sky kind of aspirations for what could happen in terms of enrollment, perhaps leveling a bit, CPI being 0.1% or 0.2% better, as well as perhaps some shifts the other direction. Have you done some of that, and what do you see as the range of potential, to Mr. Collins' point?
I have, in desperately searching for further ways to, hope for more money, and because this is as difficult for the administration to talk about, and as it is for you and for the public to hear, these kind of things. Nobody wants to have to do this. We want to continue to grow and grow and grow, and no one really likes doing these kinds of things. 0.1% right now computes to $80,000. So at the 1.5, if we were to go to 2.5, we would get an extra $800,000. That's with no construction growth. Do I honestly believe that there will be no construction growth? No. I know it's going to be extremely small. Could be as low as $4 or $5 million. I've heard from the York assessor that there is literally no new construction coming on the rolls. As of November, they had said no new construction coming on the rolls whatsoever, none. So based on that, which is the only thing that I really have to work with, I'm using a 0 to be very conservative. Do I expect it to be 0? Absolutely not. But I do expect it to be extremely low. On the other hand, we're also basing on projections for salaries and changes and benefits and everything based on how well we've done so far. We don't know what's going to happen with health insurance. We don't know how legislation is going to change what's going on. We don't know, for instance, Race to the Top and how that may change our salary projections, not this year, maybe not next year, but the years after that. We have no idea. All we can go on is based on what we have right now. So while I've been really conservative on the revenue side, which I think is kind of necessary to do, I can work those projections any way you want me to do that in order to, and that's the beauty of the program. It doesn't always work properly. Sometimes it's a little bit frustrating to deal with it, but once you have it down to where you have a baseline, which is what we were trying to do tonight, is to present that baseline, we can then work the projections to look at what we know as far as the CPI coming in on Friday and using that moving forward. Do we say if the CPI comes in at 2%, that we should look at this and say maybe we should increase it by a 0.5 or a 0.2 every single year? And maybe that's more logical to do that. I don't know what's the logical way of doing that. And what we do is once we get the CPI, we call our financial advisors and say, help us to find out what's going on with the market, what is the projections, what do we see. We'll call our assessors again and say, what's the new growth? But, right now these are the projections that we have to work on baseline. So I'm not answering this. I'm just saying that in terms of that new growth, $10 million equals $340,000 of new growth. So there, you can kind of project from there how that might affect it.
No, that's very helpful because, again, as we plan for the worst, I think at the same time as we hope for the best, our credibility is on the line in terms of planning for the worst. And then if things do improve, I think each of us would really regret being overly aggressive in taking program out, in asking staff and parents and community to really tighten the belt extraordinarily if, in fact, that we're able to support and sustain things in the way that we would like to. So as we kind of continue to explore the major variables. One, as I talked about, was CPI, and thank you for the latitude or the range on that. That one is paramount, and it's our responsibility to, in essence, keep our expenditures running in parallel with how that CPI fluctuates. So if it doesn't grow, we've got to really ratchet things back. Second, we talked about new construction. Third, enrollments, we can explore that some more. I think the fourth area that you touched on, and again, we don't need to get into a lot of the detail here, you've given us some of the planning parameters, but it's around personnel costs. And so one of the biggest differences, deltas, to the question that was asked from 2005 to today is around staffing, 48 additional staff. Now, why is that? Is that because our building principals and our administrators have gotten nutty and gone and thrown, just hired people willy-nilly? I don't think so. No, of course not. A lot of it's driven by some federally mandated programs in support of specialized programs. Much of it has been driven by increased student enrollment, which draws us back to that. But I do think we probably ought to have some additional discussion at some point in this broader topic around salary growth expectations, benefits, as you talked about, which is a significant part of this budget, the class size, which is the correlation to the amount of staffing that we need, and even in terms of district hiring practices, Dr. Sullivan, in the past, and I really regret having had to have been in this position in the past, direction was given to building administrators to only hire at lane 1, step 1, for example, whereas what I think as a community and as a board we really would like to be able to do is to hire the best qualified available resource within what we can afford, which might in many cases involve hiring staff members with masters or other forms of higher degree or additional education. So I think we need to have some discussion on that. The last piece in terms on this projections, and I want to come back to process, TIF. We've had some, in recent meetings, this topic keeps coming up, and I think it's one that needs to remain front and center by the board and working in partnership with the community. So TIF, it is good news that there has been declared a surplus of about $500,000 out of TIF 2. There are 3 TIF districts in Elmhurst right now, and at the State of Our City breakfast this morning, the mayor talked about, for example, TIF 1, and I think partly to address some criticism that I think the city council and the mayor have received around the expenditures, for example, on the fountain in downtown, and saying that $1.5 million, $2 million spent there. I think the comment was it didn't come out of the city's checkbook; it came from TIF. Well, there is one checkbook; it's the taxpayers of Elmhurst, and there is rightfully the city council by law has within a TIF district tax revenues that are elected or that they choose to spend in a certain way, right? And there is always an option available to a city council to declare surplus or to release properties to the other, to the tax rolls even prior to the end of a TIF. Now, again, it's their responsibility to manage those funds and to decide what the highest priority is for Elmhurst. But I think as a Board of Education, we have a responsibility to, at least in this discussion, when we're faced with potentially making cuts or reductions that have been identified this evening or others that may come forward, that we engage with the other elected officials in Elmhurst about what is conceivably a source of revenue. It is not a gift from the city. It is an early release of property of surplus tax revenues that are rightfully the other taxing bodies in Elmhurst, and I think that's important to understand. Now, just lastly on process, Dr. Krizik, you mentioned in your remarks this evening, this is the start of a process, right? This is to provide some context, and then for weeks and months to come, we will really try to grind on these issues. And I'd be interested in your, if you could elaborate on aspects of that process, because you talked about the list of potential or identified cuts that came from administrators and from within the district. As a Board of Education, we have a responsibility to reflect the values of the community, and I think it's just as important to provide avenues for the community to give input as a part of this process. And I think we all know and agree that 3 minutes at a time, asynchronously at the microphone is not the most efficient way to do that. So in terms of survey or other mechanisms, what strategies do you have in mind for permitting community members, taxpayers, parents, students for that matter, to be able to participate in the process? And because I think participation is important, but the other dimension that's crucial is is driving, and you and I have talked a little bit about this recently, really forcing the trade-off decisions, right? So as a Board of Education, our job is to make sure that all the expenditures fit within the envelope of affordability, which oftentimes involves trading off line item A for line item B, and so on. How can we structure a mechanism, a survey, a participation process within the community to not just gather input and not just gather it as advocacy for individual candidates for reductions, but really have it be dialogue-based that drives some of those trade-off decisions that the board has to make?
Well, later this evening, but as early as tomorrow, there will be 2 feedback mechanisms. One geared towards staff to be able to offer, again, suggestions, recommendations, and ask questions and generate ideas. And then another feedback mechanism for everybody in the community to do the same: suggestions, recommendations, feedback, ask questions. We want to funnel that information in that way because, as you said, having a series of presentations and trying to then coalesce to see patterns and trends and what the prevailing ideas and thoughts are, it's not as clear in this forum as it is when we see something in writing as people are looking at everything. So that will be effective later tonight, I'll just say tomorrow. And from that, we will then integrate all of that into a document that we will circulate both to you as well as to the administrators to be able to take a step back look at that. We are anticipating that our community as well as our staff might identify reduction options or even revenue enhancements that are not on the list. And that is really the beauty of stakeholder engagement and participation, is that looking at it through a different lens or through a different perspective. Until such time, Mr. Carlquist, that the board identifies a target, a level of where you want to go to, and you're not doing that this evening. The process that Ms. Masterton outlined tonight is that by the next board meeting, January 26th, there has to be a more extensive conversation about what of our financial objectives it is that you'd like us to achieve. And based on that conversation, that in some ways will dictate what that level is. We can then put in additional mechanisms, so choose, but whether individuals will choose to rank order what is acceptable or unacceptable as part of this community. But in order to do so, we have to look at the impact of all of those decisions. And again, as Ms. Masterton indicated, that later this evening, the spreadsheet will be available to everybody that's here in the audience and will be posted to the district website tomorrow. We've begun to identify what the impact of all of those reduction and resource allocation options are. It is very difficult to look at anything in isolation. You have to look at it in context. You have to look at what are the adverse impacts of such a recommendation, but potentially what are the gains of such a recommendation. And at some point, based on feedback, as a board, based on the prevailing feedback, you'll ultimately be making those decisions. As Ms. Hirsch indicated earlier, you do have the fortunate opportunity to be able to integrate that feedback that you receive, but ultimately you have the accountability and responsibility for making those decisions. It doesn't fall to a survey of a scorecard of 10 people say this, 15 people say that. You have to take that feedback, integrate it into what you know your fiscal future is, and make the most informed decision that you have possible. So the first part of the process, which we've always indicated as far back in December to say that there would always be stakeholder input, is the feedback survey, suggestions, recommendations, questions that we will coalesce and put together for further deliberation and discussion. I want to take one step back and say that we are concerned about making too aggressive speculatory predictions about what our finances will be in the future. Ms. Masterton spoke of the state deficit. While we only have about $8 million in state revenue, $8 million almost represents, well, it represents about 8% of our total budget. But that $8 million primarily affects the transportation fund and the education fund, with the majority of it being in the education fund. We know last year that the state did not fully pay the transportation claim from last year, and only half of that money from last year has been received this year. The unknown, the risk factor that we don't even know how to protect ourselves against is as if, what if this year we don't receive all 8 million? The concern that everyone has statewide about the state's fiscal health is so significant that in some of the neighboring districts' budgetary forecasts, they're making conservative guesses that they will not receive 100% of their state funding. And there is nothing in the projections that Ms. Masterton has put together that presumes that 10%, 20%, 15, 20, 30, 50% of state revenues will not come in. So that's the other hedge that you as a board are going to have to take into consideration. Not just what we think the CPI is, not just what we think the new property growth is going to be. That's another speculatory variable. We do not want to be an administration and or a board where people look backwards to say they were overly optimistic in their financial projections in order to shift or in order to delay making some difficult decisions. As Pat outlined earlier, 3 of the last 6 years, the CPI has exceeded 3%. 3 of the last 6. All 3 of those years, it has been below that. So I think it is wise that we are conservative, because in the out years, expenditures are going to continue to grow. And when that CPI kicks in, Mrs. Davy, so will our costs will kick in. And that will have an escalating reduplicative cost over time that is going to drive our fund balances low. Even with the expected reductions, we're still going to see a tinkering decline in fund balances over time. While you have set a target, well, right now the current policy says 30%. Okay, the current policy says 30%. Policy discussions have the range between 25 and 30. There are some on this board that believe 30 is the best position to keep us in. But with that creates an opportunity for even more difficult decisions and greater reductions beyond the 2.9. I mean, it was challenging for us to get to $750,000 of reductions this year. It was challenging. This is harder. This is harder on all of us because there are very few operational efficiencies left to cut out of this budget because we are so lean. We have had teachers, even post-referendum, express concerns about how small their supply and material budgets are in their buildings. Our principals were asked to make significant reductions, or I generate reductions out of their building. And I know they're looking at their budgets for the least painful impact, but yet they don't have rich budgets. They're tight. So two things. Process. We have the first step in the process is obtaining feedback through multiple mechanisms that'll be available this evening. We certainly can add additional feedback mechanisms should that be the directive or direction of the board. But we didn't want to turn it into a scorecard. Our goal at this point in time wasn't to indicate to a scorecard. We would like the qualitative, reflective feedback that we know that our staff and our stakeholders can give us about what they see as the potential adverse and or positive outcomes to some of the recommendations or options that have been preliminarily identified. It is only to begin the conversation, because without having that list, we would be talking in terms of speculation, and we would be unfair to both our staff and our community to only put a number up there this evening and not say what is going into that number. So we attempted to be fair, and we certainly can show you more aggressive financial scenarios, and we will do that. But it would be with significant caution on our parts that we would not want to rely on that. No one predicted a 0.1 CPI. No one. That's pretty devastating.
Mrs. Conroy.
I think it's clear that each one of us feels this is a very fine, difficult line that we're all having to walk here. But when we look at these potential reductions and cuts, it's easy to refer to them as line items. I think each one is attached to our performance, and our education in District 205. And therefore, I think staff and stakeholders' input on this is really vitally important. I think we need more information on a lot of these. There's one specific one that I was wondering if you could clarify for me, and that is the restructure of the health services. I'm not quite clear on, I understand they're talking about eliminating our health aides, who personally I can say have been fantastic with my children. But my question is, they want to add full-time nurses. How is it a cost savings? And when the number 6 in terms of nurses comes up here, we have 13 buildings. How exactly is that working?
We currently have 7 full-time nurses that are not assigned as a one-on-one or, to a particular student that travel throughout the district. One is assigned full-time. I'm sorry.
Except at York.
Yes, one is assigned full-time to York. The rest travel around the district. In working the numbers, we could, instead of having them travel throughout the district, optimize their time by having 1 full-time nurse per building. And that is where we come up with the additional 6 that would be going to the other buildings as a replacement for the larger amount of health aides.
So by adding 6 full-time RNs, I assume, that saves us money from what we're paying the health aides. Okay. My next question would be, in terms of this particular line item, I guess I'd like to see that broken down so that we can see those numbers clearly and understand them. My next question would be, some of these employees of the district have been here 15, 20 years. They're not just health aides. They're not sitting in an office waiting for somebody to come down and need a Band-Aid. So we're going to have some clerical problems in this as well. If we have an employee who's been in the district for, say, 15, 20 years, will there be an effort to reassign them somewhere else?
Within the school code, there is requirement for, and within our bargaining unit, there's a requirement for reduction in force and based on seniority. And there are bumping rights, and a certain amount of bumping rights between all of those in there. And so those are all issues that we're building. That applies for teaching staff, that applies for our PSRP, that applies for really everyone. There are reduction in force agreements that go on from there. And so, employees with 20 years of service may have, and it has to be reviewed, and David could probably speak more to it than I can, may have the ability to bump someone else in another position in order to continue employment in the district. So that is something that we're currently developing all the lists and layout. By February 1st, we have to have all our seniority lists published and out for teachers, for PSRP, for custodians, for exempt staff. We have to have that published and out by February 1st. So I know that Mr. Blatchley and his staff are working diligently to lay out all the possible scenarios of what would happen from there. Please don't misunderstand the recommendations that we make. It is definitely not a reflection of the value of the employee, personally or even as a group, but rather some very, very difficult and hard thought processes had to go into this, to have to separate ourselves from what we would love to be able to hold on to versus what we needed to be able to do. Our first and foremost priority was to the health and welfare and education of our students. That has to be our first line, no matter what it takes to deal with it. And unfortunately, in this economy, I judge us to be lucky that we're only looking at $3 million compared to, at Maine, 135 positions cut, gone, reduced. And, so I deem ourselves lucky on that.
I'm just going to pull this back a little bit. I know, obviously, this list will be out there. It'll be available for the community to look at. This is something that there was no intention to have specific discussion on because we need to first figure out as a board, we need to have discussion on what the magnitude of cuts are. We need to spend some time processing this information, getting clarification on it, coming up with our prioritization, giving direction to the administration. We will be seeking community output, and we will make sure that this information is made available. As Dr. Krizik stated, we're going to have some vehicles to get input and to get it accumulated so that we can put information together. If there's general questions that come, we can address them as a group as opposed to answering the same question again and again. So, none of this is every board member here has said this is going to be probably the toughest thing any one of us is going to have to face as we sit in this elected position. We will be looking for feedback, input from the community. We're the ones that have to make the decisions. None of these are going to be easy decisions. The March 9th date is really important because although we will not have worked on our fiscal year 11 budget, if we are making staffing reductions, we need to notify those employees by April 1st. Is that correct? So any 60 days. Okay. So, we have some time here to work through this, to put some thought into this. But, this timeline didn't come out of nowhere. It's very specific based upon, what decisions we need to make for next year. So, again, the intent for tonight is to lay the groundwork, and this isn't starting the process. This is a continuation of the process. I think Ms. Masterton did a good job of laying out. This process started when we went from a normal range CPI 2.1%, and we saw our growth rates fall off, and we continue to see our student enrollment climb another 1.7% this year. Didn't care what the CPI was doing. So I'm going to give Ms. Davey, I guess what I would ask is each board member, I'll give you another chance to give some input. I would like to open this up then, it being a workshop topic for the community. And when we do that, I'm going to just set some ground rules because there's a lot of people here. And again, there'll be a lot of time to provide input throughout this process. Mrs. Davey.
I think that as we drill deeper into our list, I appreciate that you have an impact column, but there are some things that I hope you can provide us some more data points that will help support a recommendation. I'm mainly looking for what has been the impact on student achievement with a program in place or with a position there, and how we think that you've put the impact, but I'd still like to see some more data points. The World Language Program comes to mind. We should have longitudinal data on children that started in the second grade, have gone through high school and beyond, and be able to look at what the impact has been and what the data is to show how that program has or has not been worth what the program it cost to have it over the years. That I'm just using that as an example. So I think if you can give us more data points on going down the list, the impact on the guidance counseling, the program at the middle school, just any data that you can give us to drill down would be, I think, helpful as we go forward with our decisions. I'd also like to hear more about class size. We always hear about, class size having an impact on student achievement. I'd like to hear more about that. I'd like to hear what research is saying and how magical is that 24. Because when we were listening to the revenue assumptions from the referendum of 205, it's keeping that class size and the full-time teachers that we have brought on over and above what we thought we would need to in 05 was a big driver in where we are today. So I would just like, as a board member, to see a little bit more information about what research, what best practice is saying about class size. And I really was appreciative of having revenue enhancements, and I challenge you to continue considering, are there other revenue enhancements that we can add to this list? I think it's a softer approach than having to cut things. The last thing I would ask is, when the list was being put together by your administrators, how much did you put the question out there, how can we do things differently, allocate our resources differently to have a better impact? Because rather than just add here, cut here, have there been healthy discussions about just a different way of looking at things and approaching things? The byproduct may end up being, lower cost.
Just a short answer. Resource reallocation was a significant part of the conversation that was held with administrators, trying to find different ways to advance student outcomes and improve core instruction by looking at the existing resources and reallocation was a significant portion of the conversation. Again, our purpose was not to drill down on this list this evening, and again, out of respect for the audience, who they don't even have it in front of them. So I don't want to keep going through this list this evening because I'm sure it's making them a little uncomfortable, not knowing exactly what everything is, and I respect that. But I will say that it was not just about reduction for the sake of reduction. It was a multi-step process that did look at impact. And when ultimately everyone sees some of the pieces, some are resource reallocation recommendations. And as a result of that, there is a net savings to some of those things. So it was a combination of both.
I guess what I would ask is, this list has been made available to the board members. It would be available to the community members. If there's clarification on items on here or specific things you're looking for, direct those questions through Dr. Krizik. We can put updated information, more clear information on the district website. And as we're collecting input from the community, if we get consistent themes looking for clarity, we will also plan on doing the same. Mr. Collins.
I just wanted to pursue a couple of thoughts that Dr. Krizik had and Mr. Karlquist had. Dr. Krizik, I think it's a great idea to solicit suggestions from your staff and from the community about how we can enhance revenues, reduce costs, or just plain do things differently. I also appreciate, just ask my wife, she will not characterize me as an optimist. You have to plan for the worst, as I've said before. So I completely understand your comments that, yes, the state might not pay. Things could get way worse than they are today, and we need to be prepared for that. But I'd also like to link that into Mr. Karlquist's comments that we are elected to represent the community, and it is our decision. However, as diligent representatives of the community, I would like community input, and I would like several different ways to get community input. One, a survey filled out by a statistically significant sample of people in the community, meaning different constituencies, parents, taxpayers, staff, teachers, and enough of them that it is significant. And another is, can we come up with a way to hold at least one more workshop session after this list is expanded by the suggestions that will be coming in the near future, just so we can hear the community's priorities. I mean, just so we can fairly represent what the community wants to do, and if things get worse, we know where to go next, so we don't have to do this process again.
Mrs. Duroni.
I just wanted to add one more thing. I, too, am firmly of the camp that says we have to balance our budget. Now, how far we go with keeping healthy reserves, ideally, yes, I'd like to keep 30% reserves. I'd also like, if you could possibly put together some of the ranges that Mr. Kraukowitz was referring to in terms of if we keep a 30% reserve, this is the target number. If we keep a 15% reserve, this is the target number. I mean, we have to balance the budget. We have to do that. That's minimum. But beyond that, there is a little bit of wiggle room, I think, for some of our hope and some of our different projections. So if we could have, instead of just 2 target points, if we could have a series of them.
Mrs. Taroni, the only target points we currently have by policy right now is 30%, and with our discussion, 25%. So I'm not so sure that the administration is comfortable going further down than 25%, considering that the board as a whole did not open that opportunity up to reduce reserves below that point. I mean, I greatly respect what you're suggesting to us, but if that is not current policy, we would be essentially coming to you with a scenario that has not been, fully discussed by the board in terms of a huge policy shift. Now, if at the January 26th board meeting, that's part of the discussion as it relates to, coming up with a target, then, that can be certainly part of the discussion if that is going to happen. But until such time you all have that discussion as a whole, our range at this point in time is 25 to 30%. That's what our range is, because that's the only direction that we currently have.
Would another option be to look at more optimistic scenarios for CPI and EAV? So if we said go back to our assumptions for the referendum, what would it look like then? I mean, does that get you to the same place?
It does, but I also recall hearing one of our financial advisors tell us that a healthy range is 20 to 30. Now, we can change our policy, and I don't mean to be speaking for the entire board out of turn, but to have those numbers to help us maybe decide if we want to change our policy, I don't see could be hurtful, unless it's going to take a huge amount of time to run those kinds of things. We don't want to spend a lot of money doing that without full board approval.
Perhaps what we could suggest is that we give you a scenario in which we would not need to issue tax anticipation warrants. Perhaps that's the one that you're really looking for in terms of that. Because when you're doing the short-term borrowing, what happens with districts who do that is they become deeper and deeper and deeper in debt. And so when they're issuing short-term borrowing in May, the year after that it's April, the year after that it's March, and eventually they have nothing, they're a whole year in arrears. So perhaps really what you're looking for more is when do we not have to go into short-term borrowing and the costs involved with that only complicate the matter, and what fund balance do we reach at that point, you think?
Yeah. Can
Ms. Hirsch.
Dr. Krizik and Mrs. Osterchik, I have a process question. I want to make sure that I understand. The board was provided this list of targeted ways that we could target reductions in expenditures. And is it my understanding, is this accurate, that this list is going to be posted on the website and made available to the public this evening?
It's going to be Handouts are available at the end of tonight's meeting, as well as it will be linked to the district's website as well for anyone who was not here or who follows the board meetings online or through television or in a variety of mechanisms. So hard copies are available this evening, and it will be linked and it will be available as early as tomorrow morning on the district website.
Okay, thank you for that. I do want to make a comment on that. It is a list that I know the administration has put a lot of time and thought into and a lot of energy in developing what are the least offensive, if I can characterize it that way, in terms of things that we would consider cutting back on. The concern that I have is, I guess I misunderstood. I thought that we were at this table tonight going to have a discussion and ask questions about specific line items, and that's my fault for not fully understanding that. The concern that I have is that for instance, the question about restructuring health services and 6 nurses, the descriptions that are in here, the impact that is in here, I don't know that it fully explains what the projected workaround or reallocation of resources. I'm concerned that this list being out publicly, while I believe it needs to be out publicly, there's going to be a lot of questions and misinformation and interpretation because here's the list, and it's a very short couple of sentences which describe a program or a service that is broad in scope and is going to have a large impact. So while the impact statement, I understand for somebody who is intimately involved in the operations of the district, gives a very high-level, punch list kind of, an overview of what the impact is of making each individual change. I do think that each of us are going to have questions to fully understand what each of these line items are, and I believe the community, I'm concerned that there's going to be either misinterpretation, misunderstanding. We have not yet had a discussion, and I don't know that the board members have a complete understanding. So it needs to go out to the public, but I'm going to ask the public to read it, think about it, and to understand that each one of these things that are being put up for consideration, I want to make sure I understand completely. It is our intention to have a full discussion around each one of these items. And so when you take this list and you go home, or if you look on the website tomorrow, if you're watching this online, the point is that there will be further discussion, there will be further information, and I think that's one of the concerns that I have, that I ask that you look at it and think about it, and specifically, some of the items, you may come up with ideas on ways, and many of our community members and staff members may come up with ways that we could actually still achieve the specific goal, providing a funding source from another funding source, or it would be something that if parents, kicked in a certain amount, it could be still something that would be offered. So I'm concerned that this is going out as, I don't want this to be perceived as this is the hit list, these are things that are going to be eliminated. These are things that we need to have full discussions around. Is that an accurate assessment?
The first place that we need to go is we need to figure out how much we're talking about here, because that is going to be a huge driver. At the same time, we'll start, the next steps are laid out there. There will be a lot of discussion, and before any decisions are made, we will have healthy discussion about what each thing means and how the savings are going to be there. And as Dr. Krizik said, there might be other things, other ideas that come up and that are on the board. So this isn't a detailed, specific, analytical of what each thing here means. If there's questions, I would say specifically from the board members about understanding this, again, direct those to Dr. Krizik. From a community member's perspective, we would try to do the same. There is a feedback form that will be available. It goes to an email, a district email account. There's also, if you choose not to share your name with the question or concern, there's a vehicle for that also. So, this is the process. This is a starting point for conversation. We will have a lot of conversation about all the things on here to make sure that we as a board understand it. The first thing we have to frame is, given the larger parameters of where we are as a district, within another week we'll have more specific information, our CPI. So that's one data point that we will be guessing less on. Out in the future, we're not going to know what it is, but we'll know specifically what it is as it impacts our upcoming budget cycle. So that's the process that we need to stay with. We're trying to start out with an understanding of what the range is that we need to get to based upon, do we want absolute 30%? The 30% number came from assurance that we would not have to borrow. So we've had debate, is it 30% of expenses or 30% of revenue? And there are different school districts that have, different policies as it comes to that. Although our policy is 30%, we are not, nor have we been at 30% since prior to the 2005 referendum. We have moved back in that direction. Last year, we had 1 year back at 30%. Okay, so I stand corrected on that. So just clarity on the process.
Thank you for the clarification. I just want to put this list in context. I think this list could be considered dynamic or something that you're going to take this list and go out and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're even considering this. So please, I just want some context around this, that this is a starting point. These are things that the administration has brought to the board that we need to flesh out and make sure that we fully understand all the implications. I just wish we were providing a little more context around this particular list. I'm concerned about how it's going to be received. That being said, I'm thrilled that we're going to have further discussions. We're going to have feedback mechanisms. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're interested in. And so thank you for that.
Mr. Kralquist.
Just two things very briefly. One is just to recap what I think are some of the high points of what we talked about and where I think we need to spend some additional time. We talked about data around enrollments, class size and staffing options, TIF scenarios, alternative pro formas to get some sensitivity range analysis on where we could land, and then an effective process for stakeholder feedback. And then specifically to this mystical list, which will be available, first of all, I'd like to clarify, Mrs. Hirsch, that this list wasn't just randomly selected. There was a lot of thought and effort that went into it. We as a board need to spend more time trying to understand it and be able to have an evaluation around where we think each of those things stack up. My read or interpretation of this is that if Mrs. Osijek, to your point, which is, first of all, we got to size how big the envelope is that we're trying to squeeze within. And we saw from the presentation, it could be $1 million, $1.5 million, $2.5 million, somewhere in that range. CPI is going to fluctuate, budget requirements, and what all goes in on the expenditure side. But we're talking about somewhere in $1 million to $2 million, right? So I think where this list, really is impactful is in two areas. First, there isn't one item on that list, however superficial the descriptions are and however much we read into it, there isn't one item on that list we go, that's a no-brainer, cut it, let's go, and let's move on to the next item, right? So that's the first, sort of visceral gut check on this whole process, right? Second thing is when you look at the line items and you look at how they're quantified in terms of what the cost savings would be in the budget, there isn't a line item that you say, okay, fine, we just take that one line item, we bite the bullet, and the $2 million gap that we may have to size goes away. It's the summation of all of those that is required in order to get within the range that we're talking about. So I think what I understood and took from tonight's presentation was this process that we've been working for months and months and months, as we saw the economy turning, as we saw CPI going to 0.1, working with your staff, right, gathering this input. It's a way tonight for us as a board, seeing this for the first time this week, and for the public, to start to size this. We've got to go to work on how much are we going to ratchet down, and then we'll drill into this list, and hopefully through the process we've talked about this evening and all the great minds that are in this room, in this community, maybe there are some alternatives that can supplement that list. Then we come back by the March 9th date, which is critical as far as personnel implications, and then that date actually rolls conceivably all the way through until September 26th, 27th, 28th, when the board adopts the budget for fiscal 2010-2011, which rolls all the way through the school year in terms of we see how budget managers are doing and where we can begin to spend or dial in. So thank you.
Mrs. Conroy.
Just briefly, I'd like to say, Mrs. Droney, I also remember that conversation about our 30% fund balance, and at the time it was a real sense of pride, I think, for all of us as board members. But these are extraordinary times, and I would also say that we should spend some time considering lowering that because of the extraordinary situation we're in.
I'm going to go back to Mr. Collins, and then I'm going to open this up. This is a workshop topic. So after you, I'll give the rules for that.
Thank you. This discussion has been very helpful and clarified a couple of things in my mind. If it were up to me, I mean, we're in a mode here of forecasting, and financial forecasting is the exercise of producing multiple scenarios and then probability of occurrence. It has a lot to do with my day job, and I'm used to being very wrong. So when you're wrong, you just have to make sure you've got plan B and a good process to follow. So here would be my suggestion, and it is clear in my mind that the idea of these 30% fund balances, which in our policy discussions we have discussed, the accounting rules changed with the way the state has us do school board accounting now, and a more appropriate level is 25%. But what that really symbolizes is a rule of thumb. And the purpose of that rule of thumb is that so in late May, when our cash balance is at the lowest of the year, we don't have to borrow money. Ms. Masterton is exactly correct. The idea here is that if the poison of tax anticipation warrants is that we are borrowing from next year's revenues. It's not that they cost a lot to issue. They're actually pretty cheap. But we can't be borrowing from the future. We have to balance this year's budget. And talking about economic history and scenarios, actually 0.1% CPI is not unprecedented. It occurred in 1950. And as a perspective, the CPI in 1951 was 7%. I don't expect that to happen in this economy. However, it is certainly within the range of possibilities. So I think we need to be laser focused on next year's budget. Friday, we'll have a much better idea of what our revenues are and the scenarios we have to come up with. Really, the big question is how much money is the state actually going to pay us from what they promised to pay us? So we need a two-prong approach. One, come up with several different scenarios of what our potential revenues are next year. And two, come up with a priority list of things that we can do to either enhance revenue or cut expenses. And we need to listen carefully and consider carefully because it affects our kids.
Okay, we're going to open this up as a workshop topic, and although there's not a requirement, I'm not sure how many people are interested in giving their input, so I'm going to ask people that are interested to have a sign up, and then we can just call your name and move through it. And the general topic tonight is discussion about the process. How do we move forward on this? We're not talking about specific areas. We're happy to hear your input, but as far as exchange, answering questions, if there's a specific area of cut that you're concerned about, we'll take the input on that. We're not going to discuss whether or not that's appropriate because, again, it's too early on in our process. We're still trying to map the size of how far these cuts need to go. So what I will do is, if there's anybody here that would like to come up and make a question or comment, you can stand up and come up and address us, and then anybody following that person can start on the sign-up sheet so we can just queue up. And I'm again going to try to stay with a 3-minute time frame just so that we have some reasonable expectation as far as when we would get out of here. Is there anybody here who would like to come up and provide some comments, questions?
Sure.
Thank you.
You all know me anyway. Good evening. My name's Elizabeth Dirks-Heidi. I live at 301 Addison in Elmhurst. I have 4 children in the district. Really appreciate the difficulty of the situation, very familiar with the state's lack of responsibility. Really want to echo the comments that I'm hearing from Mr. Carlquist and Mr. Collins, and I think Ms. Hirsch, about the community input here and the time frames and the process. Haven't had a chance to see the list, as it were, so happy to speak to the process. This community has proven its ability to support the school district in a responsible manner over and over again, both financially and qualitatively. I think it's important to have as many structured opportunities for community input as you are like to offer. The more, the better. I think the less you listen and the more you decide without listening, the more apt people are to question your decisions. And sometimes that's unfortunate, and you take the brunt of that. So I think the more you listen and the more people are valued, the better off the decisions go down at the end of the day when we all have to swallow things that we don't want to. I think that there's a way to structure these conversations in productive fashions without having to have sort of the laundry list of what we all believe in, to gauge the community's values. Whether it's world language or class size or personalization in our schools that are offered by the staff that have served and are currently serving us through guidance or through home health aide positions. Perhaps we can look at these things in a series of values and really, I understand the deadlines of time, January 26, March 9, 60-day notice, but structuring more time to listen rather than less, I think would be a good idea for the community as a whole. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to go down this list. If there's anybody that didn't get a chance to sign up that wants to come up at the end, that's fine. Karen Wessler.
Hi, I'm Karen Wessler. I live at 607 Cedar Avenue here in Elmhurst. I have a parent of 4 children here in the district, as well as the wife of a teacher. So I was one of the the 2 community members that showed up last week for the Race to the Top discussion. And I have a concern about that as far as the wisdom of participating in that program and what additional expenditures that's going to be required if we make a commitment to that program. So that was one thing is in reference to that. My other question was in respect to the targeted amount that you're discussing tonight. Is that the worst case scenario? Are you looking at making possibly additional cuts beyond what is set today, or for the next meeting that's coming up, is it going to be that's the maximum or possibly lower?
I'm just going to try to answer 2 of your questions shortly. As we shared last Thursday when you were here, all the rules haven't been promulgated with regards to Race to the Top. And until such time we see what the implications are of the implementation of Race to the Top, we don't know at this point in time what additional expenditures there's going to be. I did share with the board that we have 90 days to put together a scope of work plan. And that scope of work plan would reflect any additional expenditures offset by revenues coming from the state to determine what our actual responsibilities could be. The board would then have to weigh out those expenditures against the impact or the gain that it would be having on the performance and achievement of our students. That's the short answer to that.
Right, but the concern is we're still discussing the fact that it's great to have an additional goals and additional hopes to improve the curriculum and be more in line with the state. But if it's going to put us further in the hole, isn't that going to put us back to square one and have additional?
It could be a reallocation of resources again. It could be, again, taking a step back again and looking at our existing resources. The short answer to the second question is that the scenario that Ms. Masterton laid out really will address only our issues for the next several years. We're not talking about a permanent solution to our fiscal health. This is a beginning process. Every several years, a board must evaluate its fiscal position and monitor it closely. So, this is taking us out for the next 3 to 5 years, but not going beyond that. So ultimately, as all school districts will, they will continue to revisit their fiscal health and their fiscal resources.
I understand that, but the current round of potential cuts it's capped at what was discussed tonight. Okay.
I just would like to add that the current amount that we have recommended would, all projections being equal, leave us in a healthy fund balance for about 5 years' time. However, we can't guarantee, just like we can't guarantee what the CPI is going to be, we can't guarantee any of the rest of it. And the board's decision on how much they feel is the correct amount may impact 2 years down the road. So if the board says we don't need to do 2.9, we think we only need to do 2, well, that may mean in 2 years' time we have to do, 2.7 more, because we didn't do that 900,000 way back when, and now 3 years later we're that much more in the hole on that. So unfortunately, I wish we had a crystal ball that could say we know exactly what we're going to be receiving, but based on what we know right now, what we have is what we need to do. Okay. And we wouldn't want to have to do anything more than that based on what we know now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy Peterson.
Thank you for having us this evening. I live at 442 Elm Park. I have 2 boys that graduated and are freshmen in college. I have a daughter that's in 8th grade at Sandburg. My first comment is about the health aides. I've been at schools for many years now, and I can tell you that the health aides do much more than take temperatures, as somebody made reference to. I see them doing a lot of secretarial work and additional work that can't be, that needs to be done. Doing ice pack, calling parents with sick kids. I also am a registered nurse with a Bachelor of Science degree, and I looked in at one point to becoming a certified school nurse. It's a lot of extra schooling, and it also pays an additional stipend. I find it very questionable that the district can hire on nurses at a higher salary wage with extra certification and have that be less expensive. I don't know if the district is not going to hire certified school nurses, if they're just going to hire registered nurses with bachelor's degree. But then I question, are they prepared to handle the number of kids, the IEPs, the physical disabilities? If they've been working in internal medicine, they may not know how to empty a colostomy bag or do a straight catheterization. And I think that we need to make sure that whatever we are asking of these people, that they are certified to do it. Having the health aides gives the nurse that is in the buildings the ability to divide her time amongst the things, the priorities, and the physical limitations of some of the students, whereas the health aide can handle the moment-to-moment crisis as they come rolling through the door on a regular basis. And I think that definitely needs to be taken into consideration. Having had 2 boys go through middle school and now a daughter, I can tell you the place to never remove a counselor is in the middle school. I can't even tell you the difficulties that I see little girls have. My daughter's done gymnastics for 6 years, and so she stayed removed from it. But all these little girls want to be my friend on Facebook, and I can tell you the heartache that they are experiencing in middle school is very real, very scary. It is a very, very difficult time. And I had a 5-minute conversation with the 8th grade counselor on Monday, right before the bell rang. Before the bell even rang for them to be in their classroom, no less than 4 knocks on the door were received, and I was in there maybe 5 minutes. I can tell you that children in middle school need these counselors there. They serve one of the most important purposes. It's not getting any easier to grow up, and all the problems that we face, they're getting younger. I would also like to say, if you have a question, ask the kids. The kids can give you a lot of input. Thank you.
Thank you. Debbie Marquardt?
Debbie Marquardt. I happen to be the paraprofessional union president, and I just had a question about the new anticipated education fund expenditures that Dr. Masterton has on page 9. They all seem to be for curriculum and certified staff, and I was wondering if I'm reading it wrong or you're not anticipating any expenditures in any other area that does not have to do with curriculum or certified staff.
Expenditures related to specific student needs were not reflected on there because we can't anticipate those. So as our special education enrollment increases, we know that those expenditures are going to increase too. So, but we have no way, these are new, these are different, these are not some of the recurring expenditures that we've had over time. As our special, I'll use special education, as those enrollments change, increase, decrease, we know that that's going to have an impact on staff. But these were specifically related to, as Ms. Masterton identified, the strategic plan and compliance mandates that we need to address. So again, there may be some, additional assistant expenditures, but those are on an individual IEP basis, and we know we have that obligation to do those. There's not really a way to they're somewhat forecasted in the PMA software, so we didn't really delineate those out this evening.
Okay, from support staff component, there were many cuts for the support staff that were indicated as possible options in order to balance the budget, and some of those would have to be relocated in other areas, and we were talking about perhaps other certified staff, and I was just wondering with some of the areas that were being looked at, if we had anticipated the cost that was going to be necessary in order to replace those with non-certified staff. Some of the duties that are assigned to, for say, the health assistants are also secretaries. And I was wondering if we've anticipated how we're splitting that between if we did hire out for nurses and if you were going to reallocate that to other support staff members.
Again, most schools have either a secretary and an office assistant, either full-time or part-time. And again, this is, there is some thought knowing that there will be a reallocation of duties and responsibilities to others, possibly, not all fully identified. But yes, those preliminary thoughts and ideas and conversations have taken place. We do know that through any reduction process, Deb, that we would have those conversations, with the PSRP and further go into what that impact might look like.
Okay, good. And just further comment, not really as the union president, just as a tax-paying citizen. When I was here over the summer and we attended workshops for the budget, we had the full screens and we had a lot of the handout material, and it was much easier as an audience to follow along with what we were talking about. And I just thought it would have been nice if we could have received a little bit more material about what we were talking about this evening, so that as an educated community, we could have followed along a little better. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Diamond?
Kevin Diamond, 120 Kenmore. As someone who is a member of the Facilities Resource Task Force, I believe that would be a good reference for you to use, Mrs. Davey, as far as the benefit of low enrollment. That was one of our high priorities. And in our reference materials, there is a study that is referenced there. I believe it's from the state of Tennessee that references the benefit of low enrollment. And is also someone that was a part of the referenda I had a special interest in the slide that said that the current environment, economic conditions affecting the budget. And one thing that our task force, looking at the CASARDA numbers, there's the A, B, C scenarios that I'm sure you're very well familiar with, and we felt that, the center, we weren't going to be at the center, we would be at the higher numbers. So to see us having number of employees increase, I believe, Mr. Carlquist, you said, 48 more employees than we had back at that point of time. I would be curious to find out whether that is due to increased enrollment. Did we miss the number by that far? I know in Emerson we did miss the number by that far, and that was the need for adding staff there and additional facilities. But what exactly are those components of 48? Is it due to enrollment? Is it due to state mandates? And as you look through your process, what are the items that affected that? And also, one of the things that was touched upon, and I look at the budget assumptions, salary increases of 1 to 2%. Word on the street I'm hearing is, I did in our assumptions that we used with the referenda, it was 3%. That was the number that was referenced here. Word on the street is that salary increases were more in the 4.1% and not in the 1.2%. So I guess if there could be more clarification on that, that would be helpful for someone. Go, sure.
Speak to that. The teachers' increases totaled at 12.38% over 3 years. And as I said in the presentation, the 1 to 2% is further future projections. And they're pretty conservative. There's no doubt about that. It is based on next year, building into the projections, the absolute known percentage increase that we have for our current staff, our current certified staff, and just some projections based on what we don't know about the rest of the staff. So we're looking at a 1 to 2% increase. We do know that our custodial staff is coming in at around 1%, so that's included in there. Yes, this year the increase is more than 3%, but altogether over the 3 years it's 12.38. So we're looking at a total amalgamated percentage with that amount of this year, this upcoming year, included in there. So that's where the 1 to 2% came in.
Yeah, so considering that being the largest component of your budget, and you talk about budgeting to the worst case scenario, having that being, with it what was 3% and it hit 4.1%, how you're going to deal with that. Because I remember Election Day, working with the teachers, going poll watching, making calls, making sure we pass that referendum to support our teachers and they get what they get, and then looking at the current economic scenarios, where that ends up, I'll leave that for you to figure out, but having that to be an accurate component of the budget, I think is a key indicator. As I see the headline of the current economic conditions, I would expect to see teacher salaries and employment assumptions. And also in the process, one thing that, to make it clear to the taxpayer what we were asking for with the referenda, where you have the slide with the rate reduction, one thing in looking at rate, we put it in the perspective of someone with a $300,000 home or a $400,000 home. What has happened to that taxpayer over this period of time? Because I don't think my taxes have gone down as far as the dollar. Maybe the rate has gone down, but when you look at it as someone, what am I paying? Am I paying more? That is a more meaningful number, I think, to someone. What do they have to cut the check for? So if you could use that in your presentation, that would be helpful as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Kim Nosek.
Hi, my name is Kim Nosek, and I'm at 225 East Armitage. And I'm one of those people that knocked on doors in 2005, and it's very disheartening to be here again. And I guess one of the things that was mentioned tonight that I'm very interested in is the process. And I'm looking forward to that survey, and I definitely want to fill it out. But I'm really interested as a parent in the staff response to that survey. It seems like if anybody is going to know where waste is, it's going to be the staff. And so I'm curious how that works. Is that do they fill that out and it goes to the administration? Does it go to the board? Is it possible for it to go to both? Because it sort of seems like a conflict of interest to me for it to go just to the administration. I mean, if staff is making suggestions where there might be waste, I would think the board would want to know that. So I'm just curious if it can go to both.
We're going to coalesce all of that. It's just going to funnel to one location. All survey information goes to one location.
Okay.
And then
so the administration will be compiling that information?
And we'll be compiling all of that. We're not making any arbitrary decisions to sort and select. Everything that's in there is going to get coalesced.
So the actual form they fill out will go to NET?
Not the actual form.
Okay.
3 people might say, have the same suggestion.
Okay.
And we would reflect that by say this same suggestion was offered up multiple times. So the board gets an understanding of the magnitude of how often a suggestion came through. So our goal is to take everything we receive and coalesce it in an organized document for both further review by both the administration to identify potential impacts of the recommendations, whether they're revenue enhancements or reduction options, and then put those in a document to give to the board for their consideration.
Okay, so to play devil's advocate, so even if some staff members or community members say there should be cuts maybe at the top, or that will all be included?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We're not filtering anything.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Okay. We're not filtering anything.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. That's the last individual I have signed up to speak. Anybody else that would like to come up at this point?
My name is Suzanne Waite, 588 North Kenilworth. This has been a very interesting evening, and unfortunately it feels a little bit like us against them, and I don't think that's how this process should operate. Regarding the process, I would really hate to see a dime spent mailing a survey to our homes. It should be done via internet at no cost to the district. If people don't have access to the internet at their work or at their home, the school should be opened, the computer labs, for the constituents, I really dislike the term stakeholders, to come and take the survey at a school. I believe there should be a town hall style meeting. I would hate to be in your seats. I respect you for what you're doing. It is going to be very difficult to go through this process. I understand your need to be conservative, but as a parent, this is going to be a very emotional issue. Also, I think you should seriously consider reviewing the new anticipated education funds expenditures before you consider cutting, especially since you are assuming a lot of things about the economy, especially looking at the number for 0 for 2011 for building. I don't think that's realistic. So I would just caution you to be careful of your assumptions. If they're too pessimistic, you may end up having to go back, hiring new employees and training them, which is going to be an additional expense, and it will be difficult on the principals, the staff, and on the students, who are also stakeholders. I also think you should open this up because you can utilize the community, which we also have a great deal of educational experience that we can contribute. Parents in this community fight to be the room mom. I didn't even try. I have a degree from U of I speak fluent French, I speak some German, and I know a little Spanish. Open it up to the parents to come into the classroom, contribute what they have. We could increase Science Olympiad and not go ahead and spend $180,000 on a new program. We could have an after-school club for language that parents could run. There are a lot of intelligent, smart people in this community who would love to give back to our kids. Don't take away give back. Thank you.
I do want to reiterate something. We are not using postage or mailing for the survey. It will be sent out via an email with an attachment with links for both parents and staff, and it will be posted to our website so that anybody in the community can click onto a link. So we are sensitive to postage cost as well, and we're not looking to incur expenses in the solicitation of feedback from a variety of individuals.
If there are no other community members that would like to speak, we are going to move. So just, I guess, to close the process here, the expectations from the board is to spend some time. If you have questions, ask them ahead of time, and we'll talk a little bit about that in our board norms. I guess we could have some more conversation at our next board meeting about process as far as solicitation. We have the option of a community survey, how that survey gets created. I guess we would look for recommendations from you, Dr. Krizik. We will have email vehicles for community members to provide input. And I guess if there's any other recommendations that board members have, we would be open to hearing that. So with that, we are going to move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is the approval of the board agreements. And although it's a superintendent action, Mr. Kralquist.
I move the approval of board norms as devised and recommended by the Board of Education in the board self-evaluation workshop.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Davy. Before I open this up for board discussion, I'm just going to give an introduction to this topic. It's listed under superintendent action item. This is actually a board action item. This is specifically coming out of the board self-evaluation sessions that we conducted. We had 2 meetings. I forgot the date of the first one. The second one was in October. And the goal of the meeting was for us to be able to understand how to work together as a board, to evaluate how we thought we were doing and what we would do differently to be an effective board team amongst ourselves and with the superintendent to serve this district in the best way possible. Board norms are something that's pretty common in school boards. I know this school board has had norms that we have been working under that were agreed upon in board discussion several years ago, and we thought it was important because we have new board members to either reaffirm those or modify those as was appropriate in order for us to determine the best way to work together. I'm going to just go through a quick list of what those board norms are. And with the approval of these norms, we would ask each of the board members to sign off on these as our agreement that this will be how we will be working together. The first norm is that any questions or concerns by board members will come to the board president, and then I will communicate that with the superintendent. And this is really just a way to make sure that we have a good communication process. If there's a question or concern and it doesn't come up until the board table, there isn't really time to prepare or understand what the answer is. The second is the board member concerns regarding to the board packet. And that is, again, just to, if you don't understand something, if you're looking for more information, if you could send those in advance to the superintendent, it gives an opportunity to make sure that we have the appropriate answer. It's difficult to raise a question here and not have the time to prepare the answer. The third item is when a board member is looking for more information, depending on the type of question, either the feedback will be provided to all board members or in certain situations it might not. And a situation, for instance, would be, what time is the board meeting? Does everybody really need to know? Somebody had that kind of question. So things that really won't be informative to the rest of the board, we wouldn't provide the feedback to all of them. And it'll be up to Dr. Krizik to show some discretion on that. If a board member wants to copy the entire board on a request, they certainly can do that, and the response will come back to all the board members. So again, just making sure that we have consistent communication across the board table. The next item addresses agenda development, and we had some discussion about how do we get items on the agenda. We have a yearly agenda calendar that gives general timelines for some of the more significant items. If a board member wants something added to the agenda, the process would be to contact the board president. And we also have added the additional discussion area to the end of our board meetings, items for future consideration, and that would allow the board table to discuss whether or not that's something, if it's more extensive, that we would want added to a future agenda to address. And then decisions by the board, and it's just reaffirming our understanding that although it is each of our obligations to come to the board table informed and to express our own opinion, there's only one voice of the board. It's the majority vote. Whether it's 4-3 or 7-0, the majority voice is the voice of the board, and there is only one voice. The next item is communicating with staff, and this is that communication to staff if we're requesting information, if we have questions or concerns, those should be facilitated through the superintendent. As a board, we have one employee that we're responsible for administering. It is the superintendent, and we would direct questions through her. And the last item is the request for action from the superintendent. And again, that comes back to the voice of the board, that as individual board members, none of us have the authority to direct the superintendent. Is through the consensus of the board that the superintendent's actions are directed. I would ask if there's any other board discussion on this. Seeing none, I would ask for a voice vote, and the conclusion of this would be having board members just spend an extra moment to sign the board norms that we've developed together. Mrs. Walsh, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Carlquist?
Yes.
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mrs. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostojic?
Yes, 7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries, and we will validate this evening. The next item on the agenda is upcoming meetings. We have 2 meetings coming up Tuesday, January 26th. We have our business meeting, which will be here at 7:30. And again, we will have additional conversations following the topic that we talked about tonight. So hopefully we have another full room of participants to come and participate in these important discussions. The next meeting is Tuesday, February 9th, and that is a workshop meeting that will be here at 7:30. We have board communications. Ms. Hirsch?
I just wanted to inform the board that the policy committee, Mrs. Droney, Mr. Collins, and I met last night for 2 hours. We were able to review the IASB press updates from the months of September, November, and December. We were able to whip through 30 policy changes that are recommended changes coming from IASB, and we can integrate those changes into our revised policy manual without feeling the need to bring them back to the entire board. Just so that you're comfortable, I will give you a summation of all of that, but it's really mostly wording changes, footnotes, those kind of things. So we were able to knock that out. We also, Mrs. Ostojic, have a policy committee of the whole meeting scheduled for Thursday, January 28th. We will continue along with our review and revision of the proposed policy manual. So thank you for your help on that last night. We were very productive, and we're moving forward.
Thank you. I'm a little concerned that you get down to 3 and you're really productive, and as a group we get through 1 a night, but that's okay. Are there any other board communications? Seeing none, I will accept a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mrs. Conroy, seconded by Mr. Carlquist. All in favor? Those opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you to all community members who are here still, who have participated in this meeting. Your input is extremely valuable to us, and we expect to continue to hear from you in the upcoming months.
Yeah.